distinguished chairman, the chair of the Education and Labor Committee, Bobby Scott, and the chair of the Ways and Means Committee, Mr. Richie Neal. Also not with us, but in an important part of putting together the HEROES Act, Frank Pallone. The Energy and Commerce Committee is marking up a bill now, so they are in committee, so he cannot physically be with us here or virtually, but hard at work on what comes next. We come together here at a time that the American people are very concerned about the most important and nearest and dearest to their heart, their children, the education of their children. I'm glad that we're joined by Chairman Bobby Scott to talk about that. But let me just back up to the HEROES Act and what is in that HEROES Act that could be so helpful. Instead of the president saying he's going to threaten to withhold funds from schools that do not open up immediately, regardless of their health consequences, he should instead be encouraging the passage of the HEROES Act, which has, because of Bobby Scott, $100 billion education stabilization fund in it specific to the coronavirus. This is absolutely essential. In fact, in the passage of time and the demands that the president is making, we may need even more than that at this point. We may need even more. But as you know, there are three strong pillars in the HEROES Act that I want to address that affect the education of our children. First, honor our heroes, so-called because of our healthcare workers, our teachers, our transit workers, sanitation workers, food suppliers, and the rest. So many of them employed by state and local government. And our first pillar in the bill is to honor our heroes, those who risk their lives to save lives and may lose their jobs. In fact, 1.5 million across the country public employees already have because of the uncertainty in their budgets. Many of them had budget deadlines of June 30th. That bill generously but appropriately allocates resources to offset the expenses incurred by the virus, but also the revenue lost because of the coronavirus. If you go to speaker.gov/HEROES Act, look up wherever you're from, wherever you've lived, wherever you have friends, and see how much has been allocated to, again, allay the cost of the virus as well as offset the revenue lost. And we think of how much money it is, it's very, very substantial for towns and cities and counties and states across the country. And look at that, and it's for tribal governments and territories. Look at that and think, my, that's a lot of money, and then understand that it's only half of what the Republicans had in their tax scam of 2017, which added $2 trillion to the national deficit, giving 83% of the benefits to the top 1%. Really? No stimulus, no job creation, only, and now to complain that this costs too much money to pay for the coronavirus. That's one. Two, open our economy. Testing, tracing, treating, isolating, distancing. If we do that, and only if we do that, we'll be able to open our economy safely and open our schools safely. But what you hear around the country is I couldn't get a test because there wasn't enough allocation of tests for me to get one. Well, there were enough test allocation because there's not enough equipment. And there's not enough equipment to judge to say whether somebody is positive or negative because there isn't enough equipment. So what we need very strongly is for the president to implement the Defense Production Act immediately to address the need for the testing equipment and equipment to make judgments about positive or negative. It also needs to be implemented, the Defense Production Act, we'll call it the DPA from now on, for PPE, so essential. So if we want to open our economy And now if we want to open up our schools, we have to have the testings, we have to have the judgment, we therefore need the equipment, and we also need the PPE, the personal protective equipment. We need that. We need that. We need to have the separation in the schools. We need the equipment for sanitation, cleaning schools, and again and again, this costs money, but it also needs equipment to get the job done. So again, both of those are contained in the HEROES Act. And the third, putting money into the pockets of the American people. That security, that in stimulus to our economy is very important, with unemployment insurance expiring at the end of July, as well as the need for us to put into place the direct payments. Very, very important, direct payments to individuals and families in our country. There are other things in the bill that I'll talk about in terms of funding for voting at home, issues that relate to feeding the hungry with our food stamp increase that is in there, protecting the post office, and also having a strong OSHA provision. But getting back to opening the schools directly, all of it relates. The food, when we're opening the schools, we have to understand how we're going to feed the children if they're learning, if they have distance learning, how we're going to have the equipment for them to engage in district learning if we haven't taken the steps necessary in a safe way to open up the schools. So in the CARES Act, we have specific legislation that calls for the use of the DPA, the Defense Production Act, for the purpose of PPE and equipment and all the rest. That's in the HEROES Act. Some of it was in the CARES Act. And to that point, yesterday, a number of our chairmen, including Frank Pallone, wrote to the Secretary of the Army and the Secretary of HHS and spelled out what was in CARES and what was in HEROES in order to, specifically what was in CARES, because that's been a while, to increase production of medical supplies and equipment under the DPA, but then they go into how it hasn't, even though allocated, hasn't been spent. Again, I have 4 daughters who have children in school from grade school to college. It is a cause of great concern, I know, in every family in America, some with more options than others. And we have to think of those with the fewest options and take the greatest care for all of our children, but recognizing the challenges that are faced by families as they make this difficult decision, and school districts that are currently making decisions about how and when to open. So with that, I want to yield to the distinguished chair of the Education and Labor Committee, who worked very hard to have the education stabilization provision in the HEROES Act, who then same week, at the same time, and in the last week we were here putting forth in the infrastructure bill even strong language about how to address concerns that we have in our schools, even before the coronavirus, when we talk about the safety in the schools and the predisposition of children to be susceptible to such a virus. I congratulate him for his great work. I thank Mr. Bobby Scott of Virginia, Chair of the Education and Labor Committee. Bobby, thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Madam Speaker. Good afternoon, Chairman Neal, and thank you both for your leadership in confronting the COVID-19 pandemic. And let us be clear, all of us want to reopen schools for full-time, in-person instruction. We know that in-person instruction is the best way to achieve academic success. It's also important to learn social skills, and obtain the nutrition from school meals, and detect possible child abuse. But we must also recognize that the health and safety of students, educators, and their families are our highest priorities. 60 days ago, the House Democrats developed a plan to help schools reopen safely. That plan, the HEROES Act, includes emergency funding that is necessary to maintain student access to education, a comprehensive testing strategy to ensure that we can identify, isolate, and treat anyone infected with COVID-19, and enforceable workplace safety standards to protect educators and other school staff. And of course, when you protect the workers, you also have to protect the students. Instead of working with House Democrats in this legislation, Senate Leader McConnell dismissed the bill and failed to offer an alternative option to safely reopen schools and the economy. Worse, he dismissed the very real threats presented by the unprecedented budget shortfalls facing states and local governments that could force devastating cuts to public education. Meanwhile, the Trump administration's failed response to the pandemic has needlessly led to spikes in new COVID-19 cases in communities across the country. Yesterday, 5 states set records for daily new cases of COVID-19. As we've seen all over the past week, the Department of Education has no plan to bring students back into the classroom safely, particularly in communities where daily new cases of COVID-19 continue to rise. Its strategy thus far has consisted of tweeting, threatening to cut off funds from school districts, and telling school officials to figure it out on their own. Students, parents, and educators deserve better. The HEROES Act reflects our commitment to not just hoping schools can reopen safely, but taking action to safely bring students back into the classroom. Before the pandemic, teachers were spending an average of nearly $500 of their own money every year to buy supplies for their classrooms. It should come as no surprise that many school districts cannot afford to provide personal protective equipment, PPE, soap and hand sanitizers, cleaning and sanitizing services, and many other critical safety measures that are recommended by the CDC. In fact, according to the Superintendents Association, the average school district will need an additional $1.8 million to safely reopen. But instead of helping schools comply with the CDC guidelines, this administration's solution is to try to water down the guidelines. Our solution, the HEROES Act, gives schools the tools they need to protect students and staff. This package includes $100 billion for education, with nearly $58 billion of that dedicated for K through 12 schools. It includes $1 trillion to help state and local governments address looming budget shortfalls and to avert potentially devastating cuts in public education. If this funding is not available, any federal appropriation to education will only partially offset the cuts in the state and local level, and the additional cost to reopen safely will not be addressed. In addition, this package also dedicates $75 billion to strengthen our testing and contact tracing efforts. As other countries have demonstrated, investment in testing is critical to stopping the spread of the virus and restarting the economy and reopening our schools. The HEROES Act also directs OSHA to issue an enforceable emergency temporary standard to protect workers from airborne infectious diseases. That would help protect America's workers, including teachers and school staff, by replacing unenforceable voluntary guidance with mandatory enforceable standards. And everybody knows you can't protect the workers without first protecting the students. And so in education, the HEROES Act not only pays extra for a hero's work, but as you can see, we're trying to protect the workers from being infected in the first place. The CDC has made it clear that reopening schools to full-time, in-person instruction carries the highest risk of producing a spike in COVID-19 infections. Over the past month, we've seen such spikes play out in communities across the country. For example, a summer camp in Missouri was recently forced to close after 82 children and staffers contracted COVID-19. Last month, 3 Arizona summer school teachers who shared a classroom all contracted COVID-19. Tragically, one of those teachers died. Rather than downplaying the risk of reopening the schools, we should be doing everything we can to make sure that they can reopen safely. Over the past 2 months, Senate Republicans and the administration have wasted valuable time by refusing to even consider the HEROES Act. Students, parents, and educators are now facing the consequences of this lack of planning. For example, the CDC cites proper ventilation as an essential element of safety. And we know that almost half the school districts in the country need significant improvements in their ventilation systems to comply with the CDC guidelines. These improvements take planning, timing, and resources, and those resources can be found in the HEROES Act and the Moving Forward Act, the recent infrastructure bill that provides funding for reopening and rebuilding America's schools, and that's about $130 billion for school infrastructure. Now, opening schools should not be a partisan political situation. This is about the health of our students and the teachers and other staff who dedicate their lives to helping young people reach their full potential. But as the saying goes, when you fail to plan, you plan to fail. The HEROES Act is now a 2-month-old plan that's awaiting action in the Senate and with this administration. Let's not fail the America's schools, educators, and communities with illegal threats to withhold funds. Instead, let us rise to the occasion and provide school districts the funding they need to provide quality education while also protecting the health and safety of our students, educators, parents, and communities. We can do that by enacting the HEROES Act. Thank you. And now I'm very pleased to turn it over to the distinguished chair of the Committee on Ways and Means, the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Neal.
Thanks, Chairman Scott, and to you and to Speaker Pelosi, much appreciative of your strong leadership on this issue. I've been traveling all over my district for the last couple of weeks, and the most consistent message I hear is how our communities still need to help to weather the devastating effects of the pandemic. The uncertainty is problematic. Our work has been grounded in 3 objectives: combating the public health crisis, supporting American workers, and keeping our economy afloat. All 3 of these must be done simultaneously, and the comprehensive HEROES Act does precisely that. The Ways and Means Committee moved quickly and again decisively, creating programs that have successfully kept Americans as a whole as possible, like emergency unemployment compensation and economic impact payments. The HEROES Act extended the weekly $600 pandemic unemployment benefit through the end of the year, and it authorized another round of impact statements. It's been 2 whole months since the House passed this critical legislation. The Senate has failed to follow our lead and to provide certainty to struggling American families. Over 50 million people, let me say that again, over 50 million Americans have filed for unemployment benefits since the beginning of the pandemic, which would have been an unthinkable number earlier this year. The extra $600 per week has been an absolute lifeline to these Americans. But without additional action, it's set to expire in 2 weeks. This $600 not only helped with sustenance, it helped to create demand. The CBO report released earlier this month showed that half of those receiving unemployment benefits in July are people of color. If Senate Republicans don't act and extend this benefit, they will continue to further the deep divisions in our economy along racial lines. The worst thing that we can do now as members of the American family is to embrace any form of complacency. We are not on the other side of this pandemic. We need to provide another round of checks to get money directly into the pockets of those who need the support the most. These lifelines help families who have lost their regular sources of income afford the essentials of life and avoid eviction or homelessness. These programs and initiatives are not luxuries, they're necessities that are keeping families and workers safe and healthy while patching our economy as best we can. It's becoming more clear every day that we have a long way to go to safely return people to work, to provide them with the confidence to go back to work. Americans need additional help in the meantime. Senate Republicans have been sitting on the HEROES Act for the last 2 months. There's no more time to wait. This is cruel to do this to the American family when they're trying to plan for what the fall might look like. Millions of Americans and the future of the economy are depending on them to act. So thanks to the Speaker for her leadership. Again, we need to reject any form of complacency in this atmosphere. Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I thank you for clearly pointing out how interconnected all the aspects of the HEROES Act are in terms of direct payments and unemployment insurance being a stimulus to the economy because people need that money, they spend it directly, they inject demand into the economy, they create jobs, and also the interconnection of the health and well-being of the American people to our opening up that economy. Thank you. And Mr. Scott, thank you also for pointing out the connection between the Education Stabilization Fund and all that that does to help our kids and getting them back to school, but also the importance of the funding for state and local government, which runs by and large, our school system provides more than 90% of the funding for schools, pays our teachers, and again, all the ancillary services, whether it's transportation to school, whether it's, again, the teachers, the custodians, and the rest, as well as food, sanitation, public first responders, and the rest. So with that, I just want to say the following. This is how many times have we had to say in the course of this pandemic, we are at a critical moment? We really are at an even more critical moment now, because we know what the answers are. For 2 months now, we've spelled out a strategic plan in the HEROES Act, because in the other funding that we had put forth with testing, the administration did not follow a strategic plan. In fact, they didn't even spend some of the money in a way as was designated by those bills. So we were very specific, and one of our chairmen, who isn't here but was very much a part of all of this, Frank Pallone, the chair of the Energy and Commerce Committee, was instrumental with his committee in putting forth that second pillar, open our economy, testing, tracing, treating, separation, et cetera. So I thank him for his leadership in that regard, and he was part of this letter to the Secretaries of Defense and HHS asking where's the money that we allocated so far for the equipment. But we can talk all we want about testing, tracing, et cetera, but if we don't have the equipment, people are standing in line or their cars are in line to see whether they even will qualify to be tested. And we need to know the extent of the pandemic in order for us to take the caliber of action necessary. And we need to know how communities of color are disproportionately affected by this. If we're going to have the proper testing, tracing, treating, we can do that. But you have to have the equipment. You have to have the equipment. So we're saying to the President, Mr. President, get us the equipment. The Defense Production Act require PPE, personal protective equipment, not only just to open up the schools, but to protect our heroes, our healthcare workers, whether at the state and local government or privately. PPE, we need it. Why don't we have it? Because you will not, for some reason, implement the Defense Production Act. Why don't we have enough equipment to test appropriately and to be able to make judgments on those tests as to whether positive and negative, rather than waiting 7 days to find out one way or another when the result is practically obsolete one way or another because it is so late. 24, 48 hours, that should be the extent of it. There is an answer. There's a plan. The resources are designated in a very appropriate way, but we need the equipment, and we can't have it unless the President implements the Defense Production Act. I also just want to point out that, again, families across America are very concerned. As has been said by distinguished Chair Scott, children want to go to school. We want them to learn. We want them to socialize. Teachers want them to be in school. Parents want them to be in school, but we cannot risk their health and safety, and indeed their lives, or the lives of anyone that they might bring this home to. Our teachers, our custodians, our people who work in public schools need to be protected. So the point is that we can't follow the attitude of this administration. If you If you don't open up, we're not giving you money. No, we're going to give you money so that you can open up. It's in the HEROES Act. And we can't follow the lead of the Secretary of Education who said, why shouldn't children take risk? Astronauts take risk. Oh, really? Well, maybe when they're an astronaut, they will decide to take that risk. But we have to decide for them that going to school is not a risk to their health and to their safety. With that, I'd be pleased to take any questions. Yes, ma'am. Well, I think you have seen the public evolution of their thinking. When we first passed this, they said, there's no way, never, we need a pause, it's too much money and all the rest. Now we've passed the June 30th deadline for state and local governments to carefully prepare their budgets. We're getting, sadly approaching the deadline for the expiration of the unemployment benefits. This is really important. Imagine the uncertainty in households across America now who depend on the unemployment insurance because through no fault of their own, they have lost their jobs because of this pandemic, and they have to wait and see what the Senate might decide. But anyway, they went from 0 to now 1.3. That's not enough. We need more. But we see the public evolution of their thinking. At the same time, the Secretary of the Fed has recommended to Congress that we recognize the role that state and local government plays in our economy and the jobs that they create and the, again, demand that injects into the economy. The Secretary of the Treasury has said that we need to do more. Both of them indicate that the economic downturn can be much worse if we don't act in a very serious way now. So they've made some, one or the other, there's a recognition that there's going to be a bill. Let me just put it that way. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Is there any openness on unemployment insurance enhanced benefit to do something that's not $600 per week, perhaps? Do you see a compromise there with Republicans that maybe it's $300 or $400 or $200?
Well, you know, it's interesting because that pillar, you know, we have the pillar of honor our heroes, open our economy with testing, and that pillar is about putting money into the pockets of the American people. One piece of it is unemployment insurance and the benefit you are talking about, and another part of it is how we put direct payments into the family, $6,000 to a family of 5, desperately needed by these families. Again, spent immediately, injecting demand into the economy, being a stimulus. So we'll see what that entire package looks like. Yes, ma'am.
Speaker Pelosi, but following up on her question, are you being included yet in this conversation?
It's not a question of included. We've put our marker on the table. It's very disciplined. It's nothing more than we need, although I must say we may need more for education now that the president is making the demand that he is making. So it's not a question of who's included. It's a question of the American people requiring this. Democrats and Republicans and state and local government across the country are weighing in on this in a major way. We think it's going in the right direction. Yes, sir.
Would you be willing to see the money for schools being contingent on them reopening? And separately also, would you be willing to see Congress go on recess for August without a bill being on the president's desk?
No and no. So your first question, do I think money to schools being contingent on them opening? No, I think their opening is contingent on their receiving money, but not money as a threat, money as a precaution to protect the children, to have the spacing, smaller classes, more teachers needed, more personnel therefore across the board needed in a way that is safe for our children. And no, I don't think we can, we have to have a bill, and we will have a bill, and hope we will have it sooner rather than later because people really need to have it, and we should have it before the expiration of the unemployment insurance. Yes, sir.
On the question of unemployment insurance, Democrats have traditionally viewed that as an effective form of stimulus.
Yes.
On the other hand, Republicans say that it's unfair
Were you associating yourself with the previous question? I think I answered that question. I don't have any intention of butting any heads. If we butt any heads, it's going to be over the safety of our children. You know, my whole purpose in politics are the three most important issues facing the Congress: our children, our children, our children. And that's where I butt heads. That's the hill I fight on. We will, you know, it's so funny to me when you talk about $600 versus $400. They had no hesitation to give 83% of the benefits of their tax scam to the top 1%. We believe, as Democrats, that when there is an intervention that is needed, a public intervention that is needed, it should be used in the most effective way, that where it is most needed and where it's going to have the most stimulus for the economy. And in that third pillar, we have the unemployment insurance, the boost, because this is a highly unusual situation, and some would say unique. Secondly, food stamps, which are a big stimulus, and by the way, they have resisted that while people are in long lines in cars going to food banks that they never ever thought they would be going to, and there they are in food bank lines, and the Republicans in Congress are like, they reject it. In one bill, we had some food stamp change. This time, we have it more so, and they have resisted that. Hopefully, what they see in their own communities will touch their hearts, and they will understand that even middle-income families are not able to put food on the table in the present economic situation. So again, all of that is, most economists tell us when you're doing something like this in a situation like this, put the money where it is needed most, because that's where it will be spent first, injecting demand into the economy, creating jobs, a stimulus. And so we'll see how it goes with the conversation about that, but some of it depends on what they're willing to do on the direct payments as well. This isn't about government and philosophy or any political differences of opinion. This is about meeting the needs of the American people at the time of a pandemic that has lost about 40 million jobs, that we have had the 16th straight week of unemployment benefit requests exceeding 1 million per week, 16 weeks. This is about a terrible threat health-wise that has an impact on the economy and on our schooling as well. So we have to think big, and you can't solve the problem unless you have the tools to do so. And that's why the president has to answer for his delinquency in not implementing the Defense Production Act to produce the equipment so that people can take the test and that the test can be analyzed in a 24, 48-hour period, not wait a week or longer to find out whether they're positive or negative. And by then, they have to get tested all over again because the information is obsolete. Yes, ma'am. Excuse me, if you don't have to take it off, but just talk slower, please.
One of the things that wasn't included in the CARES Act was the issue of liability protection.
That's right.
Where you're seeing compromise with the Senate on that issue.
We think the most important way to protect our workers and our employers and customers and clients of businesses as well is to have a strong OSHA provision in the legislation. We tried that with the very first COVID bill. All along we've tried to have that. They have resisted that. But just think of it. If you have OSHA standards that say to an employer, if you do this, you must do this, 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 and this to protect your workers and your customers, clients, whatever. And they do that. That is their protection. It's their protection. It's the protection of their workers. It's their best defense. It's a far better solution than saying to workers, you're an essential worker. You have to go to work. You won't get unemployment insurance if you don't because you're an essential worker. And by the way, we're not implementing any OSHA provisions, not the ones that exist now, or even the enhanced one, which we are not agreeing to. So if you get sick, you have no recourse. That just isn't fair. Okay, yeah, no, you had one, any others without a question? Haven't had a question? Okay, I really do have to get back to my day job. I thank you all for being here at this time. Every day that goes by, the anxiety deepens in the households of America. The kitchen table concerns about how they're going to pay the bills, how are they going to put food on the table, are they going to be able to send their children to school, are they at risk of being infected, and what does that mean in terms of transmission to other members of the family? What are we disconnected from that we don't understand? There are solutions. And if you want to know 4 words on how to solve it, science, 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 and science. But instead, we have an administration that ignores the science and dislikes the governance that goes with it. If science tells us that this would be the best path, but you don't want to exercise any standards from a governmental standpoint, the American people, the virus continues. We are at a moment, if we don't recognize that, it's going to be even worse, and we must prevent it from being. We can beat this. We're Americans. We're the United States of America. We see other countries solving this. We can do that. We can do better. But we have to decide to do it. It's all a decision. A decision the president can make in one respect by deciding to implement the Defense Production Act, or else answer for it. Why aren't you? Why aren't you anticipating the need that we know we already have to a great extent for the equipment, for the PPE, equipment in every way, and even more that we're going to need, if God willing, soon, and we pray that it will be true, that there's a vaccine or cures and the rest. What are the syringes, the vials, the equipment that is needed to convey, to minister to the needs of people with that vaccine? We've just got to be thinking way ahead. And that's what we do in the HEROES Act. We hope that within the next couple of weeks, it will be the law of the land. Thank you all very much.